someone tried to rob my car with me in it at 7-Eleven, but didn't know how to drive manual. It was around 2 a.m., one of those hours where everything feels slightly unreal, like the world is running on low power mode. I was parked in the 7-Eleven lot, engine off, phone glowing in the dark, watching creepy pasta videos on YouTube. The kind with whispered narration and grainy thumbnails that make you feel like something's wrong, even when nothing is. I had a couple of taquitos balanced on the center console, grease soaking through the paper, and I was just existing, not rushing, not expecting anything, just killing time. My car was one of the few in the lot, the neon lights buzzing overhead and casting that harsh, sterile glow that makes everything look off. I felt safe enough. My keys were in my pocket like always, and my car only unlocks the driver's side door when I pull the handle twice. It's a small detail, but it mattered to me. It meant I could sit there alone without worrying too much. I wasn't doing anything risky. I wasn't talking to anyone. I wasn't even looking around. Then I noticed someone moving in my peripheral vision. At first, I didn't think much of it. People walk around convenience stores at all hours. But when I glanced up, I saw a man heading straight toward my car, not toward the store, not past it, directly at me. My stomach tightened a little, but I brushed it off. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I'd just been watching too many creepy videos. He stopped by the passenger side window. That was when my instincts started whispering that something wasn't right. He didn't knock at first. He just stood there, close enough that I could see his reflection in the glass. I rolled the window down slightly, enough to hear him but not enough to feel exposed. He asked if I could help his girl, and because she had something in her eye. I remember blinking at him, confused. It didn't make sense. Why ask a stranger in a car? Why not go inside where there were lights and people? I told him, probably more bluntly than polite, to just blow in it. I honestly didn't know what else to say. I wasn't trying to be rude. I just didn't want to be involved. He lingered. That's when the unease settled in fully, that heavy feeling in your chest when you realize a moment is shifting into something else. I told myself it was nothing, that he'd walk away, that this was just another weird late-night interaction. I had no idea that in the next few seconds, everything would change. He didn't walk away. That was the first thing that really set off alarm bells in my head. Most people, when you brush them off, get annoyed or embarrassed and leave. He just stood there, shifting his weight slightly, like he was deciding something. The silence stretched longer than it should have, long enough for me to notice how close he was to the car, how his hand hovered near the door instead of his pockets. I remember thinking how stupid the excuse sounded the more I replayed it in my head. Something in her eye. If his girlfriend was even real, she was nowhere in sight. The passenger seat beside me was empty. The store windows behind him reflected only shelves and fluorescent lights. No distressed girlfriend. No urgency, just him. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was around the corner. Maybe he was nervous. Maybe I was overthinking it because of the creepy videos still playing quietly from my phone speaker. I turned the volume down, suddenly aware of how alone I actually was. He started talking again, rambling a little, repeating himself in different words like he was buying time. His voice wasn't panicked or grateful. It was flat, rehearsed. That's when I noticed his eyes weren't really looking at me. They were flicking around the interior of my car, the dashboard, the center console, my hands, my lap, like he was taking inventory. My grip tightened on my phone. I glanced down at the lock indicator without moving my head. Driver's door locked. Passenger side should have been locked too. I felt a small sense of relief, like at least that part was under my control. Still, my pulse was picking up, thudding in my ears louder than the buzzing lights above us. I told him again that I couldn't help. This time my voice came out firmer. He nodded slowly, but he didn't step back. Instead, he leaned in just a little closer, enough that a shadow crossed over the passenger seat. It felt invasive in a way that made my skin crawl. In hindsight, there were so many little signs stacked on top of each other. The way he positioned himself between my door and the store, the fact that he never once suggested going inside for help, the way his posture shifted like he'd made up his mind, I remember thinking, if he tries anything, I'll hit the horn. It was a flimsy plan, but it was all I had in that moment. My heart was racing now, every instinct telling me I was past the point of a harmless interaction. And then, without warning, he reached for the passenger door handle. For a split second, I thought it wouldn't open, that the lock would hold, that this would be the moment where he realized it wasn't going to work and backed off. I was wrong. The handle moved, and that was when the situation stopped being uncomfortable and became terrifying. The passenger door opened. For a split second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. There's a strange delay when something crosses from possible to actually happening, like your mind needs a moment to catch up. I remember staring at the open door, thinking it had to be a mistake, that maybe he'd pulled the handle without realizing it was unlocked and it would just stop. It didn't. He climbed into my car like it was the most natural thing in the world. No hesitation, no rush, just sat down in the passenger seat. his presence instantly filling the space. The car suddenly felt too small, like the air had been sucked out of it. My heart slammed so hard I could feel it in my throat. Before I could say anything, before I could even fully turn toward him, he looked at me and said calmly, "Get out of the car," and not shouted, not whispered, just stated, like he was telling me the time. I froze. My hands were still on my phone, my taquitos forgotten, my body locked in place. I remember staring straight ahead through the windshield, the bright store lights blurring as my vision tunneled. My thoughts scattered instantly. Is this real? Is this actually happening to me? Right here, seconds passed. Maybe only 2 or 3, but they felt stretched and distorted, like time had slowed down just to mess with me. Every warning I'd ever heard, every true crime story, every late night what if scenario collided in my head at once. I didn't scream. I didn't move. Finally, I turned my head and looked at him. Up close, he didn't look frantic or desperate. He looked weirdly confident, like he expected me to comply without question. That almost scared me more than aggression would have. I said no. It came out steadier than I felt. For a moment he looked surprised, like that hadn't been part of the script. His expression flickered, annoyance flashing across his face. That was all the confirmation I needed that this wasn't a misunderstanding, wasn't some awkward social misstep. This was intentional. He reached across me. That's when my body finally reacted. Adrenaline hit like a switch flipping on. I shoved his arm away, twisting in my seat, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. The car filled with the sound of movement, seat fabric scraping, plastic creaking, my breath coming out sharp and uneven. We struggled in the confined space, elbows knocking into the center console, knees bumping. I felt clumsy and small, but panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. I slammed my hand down on the horn, over and over, the sound blaring through the quiet parking lot. I didn't care how it looked. I didn't care who stared. I just needed noise, witnesses, time. As the horn echoed and the lights buzzed overhead, one thought cut through everything else, clear and sharp. I am not getting out of this car. The car felt impossibly small once we started struggling. Everything happened at once. His arm coming toward me again, my body twisting away, the seatbelt digging into my side as I shoved against him. The center console pressed into my ribs, hard plastic biting into my skin. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow, louder than I'd ever heard it before. Panic doesn't feel dramatic when you're inside it. It feels messy, frantic, clumsy. I slammed my hand down on the horn again and again, the sound exploding through the parking lot. It was loud, ugly, impossible to ignore. I didn't care if I looked crazy. I wanted attention. I wanted anyone inside the 7-Eleven to look up, to glance outside, to notice that something wasn't right. He swore under his breath and tried to grab me, and I shoved him back with everything I had. My thoughts were scattered, but one thing was crystal clear. I was not leaving this car, not voluntarily, not for him. Time stretched in a strange way. I had no idea if we were fighting for 10 seconds or a full minute. My arms burned. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I remember thinking how surreal it was that this was happening in such a normal place, under buzzing fluorescent lights with posters advertising cheap coffee and hot dogs, and then, in the middle of all that chaos, something clicked. The fear cracked just enough for logic to slip through. He wanted the car, that was obvious now, not my wallet, not my phone, the car, and suddenly I realized how badly he'd miscalculated. I blurted it out without thinking, the words spilling out sharp and almost hysterical. "Do you even know how to drive manual?" The question hung there between us. He froze, actually froze. He looked down at the center console, at the stick shift, like he was seeing it for the first time. Then he looked at me, then back down again. His confidence drained so fast it was almost funny. "No," he said, just one word, quiet, defeated. For half a second I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it punched through the fear. This guy had forced his way into my car, tried to intimidate me into leaving it, and didn't even know how to drive it. My keys were still in my pocket. Even if I somehow got out, he'd stall it immediately. And even if by some miracle he figured it out, the car wouldn't restart without the key. He was trapped in his own bad decision. I saw the realization hit him too. The struggle lost its edge after that. His movements became hesitant, uncertain. The horn was still blaring, the parking lot no longer quiet, and I could feel the balance shifting, not safe, but shifting. For the first time since he opened that door, I felt something other than fear. I felt control creeping back in. Once the realization settled in for both of us, the energy inside the car changed. It wasn't over yet, but it wasn't the same kind of terrifying anymore. The panic that had been clawing at my chest loosened its grip just enough for me to think clearly. He wasn't confident now. He wasn't in control. He was stuck in a situation he hadn't planned for, sitting in a car he didn't understand, with a driver who suddenly knew she had the upper hand. My keys were still in my pocket. I could feel them pressing against my leg, solid and grounding. That small detail made everything else fall into place. Even if I got out, which I wasn't planning to do, he couldn't go anywhere. A manual transmission isn't forgiving. Stall it once, stall it twice, and suddenly you're panicking while everyone around you is staring. And without the key, it wouldn't start again anyway. I kept hitting the horn, shorter bursts now, deliberate. Each blast felt like a countdown. Every second that passed increased the chances that someone inside the store had noticed, that an employee was looking out the window, that a phone was being pulled out, that cameras were recording everything. He shifted in the seat, frustration written all over his face. I could tell he was running through his options, realizing how few he had left. This wasn't a quiet theft. This wasn't quick or clean. This was loud, public, and messy, and that wasn't what he'd signed up for. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence is louder than words. I just stared at him, steady and unblinking, daring him to make another move. My hands were shaking, but I didn't let him see that. I sat my ground, shoulders squared, breathing slow on purpose. Finally, he backed off. He muttered something under his breath, angry, embarrassed, defeated, and shoved the passenger door open. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the smell of asphalt and stale convenience store food. He stepped out quickly, glancing toward the store like he was suddenly aware of how exposed he was. Then he was gone. I slammed the door shut and locked it immediately, my fingers fumbling with the controls as the adrenaline caught up with me all at once. My whole body started shaking now that it was over. The horn stopped blaring, and the sudden quiet felt almost deafening. I sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead, heart pounding, replaying everything that had just happened. My taquitos were cold, my phone screen had gone dark, the creepypasta video had ended at some point without me noticing. I started the car and drove the short block home, hands tight on the steering wheel, checking my mirrors over and over. The world felt different, sharper, louder, like I'd been dropped back into it too fast. I knew one thing for sure as I pulled into my driveway. He hadn't just failed to steal my car, he'd underestimated me, and that mistake saved me. As the adrenaline slowly drained out of my system, the absurdity of the whole thing started to sink in. I kept replaying it in my head as I drove. Every look, every word, every decision that led up to that moment. And the more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it became. Not funny in a ha-ha way at first, but in that stunned, hollow way where your brain is trying to make sense of something that shouldn't have happened at all. Of all the cars in that parking lot, he picked mine. A manual transmission, a very specific kind of car that requires actual knowledge to operate. And not just that, my car wasn't exactly subtle. It had a body kit, blue underglow lights, and a black vinyl top that made it stand out even in the middle of the night. It wasn't some anonymous beater you could disappear in. It screamed notice me from every angle, if he'd somehow managed to get it moving, and that alone felt laughable. The cops would have spotted it almost immediately. There was no universe where this ended well for him, no clean escape, no quiet success story, just flashing lights and embarrassment. What really got to me, though, was why he thought he could do it in the first place. Because I was alone, because I was sitting still, because I was a woman, because I looked like an easy target, that realization sat heavy in my chest. It wasn't just about the car. It was about the assumption that I'd panic, comply, get out without a fight. That I'd shrink, that I'd hand over control simply because he told me to. Instead, he ran headfirst into a situation he wasn't prepared for, and the irony of that didn't escape me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the fear had cooled into something else. A shaky kind of clarity. I sat there for a minute with the engine idling, my hands still trembling slightly on the steering wheel, staring at my front door like it was miles away instead of a few steps. I checked my mirrors one more time before turning the car off, then I went inside and locked the door behind me. Later, when the cops came by to take my statement, they laughed, not at me, but at the situation. At the sheer stupidity of trying to steal a manual car without knowing how to drive it, especially one that distinctive. Their laughter felt strange but grounding, like confirmation that I wasn't crazy for finding it ridiculous too. Now, when I think back on it, the memory still carries that edge of fear, but it's dulled by disbelief. Who tries to steal a car they know nothing about, who risks everything on the assumption that someone will just give up. That night could have gone very differently, I know that, but instead it ended with a failed plan, a bruised ego, and one very important lesson burned into my mind. Underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake you make. After the guy finally left, I stayed in my car for a few minutes, just sitting there, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my racing heart. The adrenaline was fading slowly, leaving me shaking and hyper-aware of every sound outside. The parking lot felt quiet again, almost unreal, like the night itself was holding its breath. I couldn't believe what had just happened. One moment I was eating taquitos and watching creepypasta videos, and the next I was fighting someone inside my own car. I knew I needed to get home, but even that short drive felt tense. Every shadow on the street, every flicker of light in a window made me jump. I kept thinking about how close it all could have been. If he'd known how to drive a manual, if I'd panicked and gotten out, I didn't want to imagine what could have happened. My stomach twisted just thinking about it. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't even bother turning off the car right away. I sat there, catching my breath, running through the events in my head like a replay I couldn't stop. My keys were still in my pocket, the car untouched, and yet my hands were still shaking. I felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Relief that nothing had been damaged, that no one had been hurt, and disbelief that someone had actually tried this. The cops showed up a little while later. My house is just a block away from the 7-Eleven, so they had been able to trace my license plate from the store's security cameras. When they knocked on my door, I opened it to find 2 officers standing there, not with frowns or urgency, but with that mix of professionalism and barely contained amusement that I'll never forget. They asked me to explain everything from the beginning, and as I recounted the story, how he'd tried to get me to leave, how we wrestled inside the car, and how he didn't even know how to drive manual, they actually laughed. Not at me, but with me, shaking their heads at the sheer stupidity of the attempted theft. I gave them my statement, told them the details as clearly as I could, and watched as they took notes. Even as they left, still chuckling quietly between themselves, I felt a weird kind of vindication. I hadn't been overreacting, I hadn't imagined it, it had really happened, and I had handled it. Somehow, I'd come out on top. Afterwards, I thought about following up with the police, but I didn't. There was no damage to my car, no injuries, and honestly, it felt almost pointless. The guy had made himself obvious enough that if he tried anything again, he'd get caught immediately. There was no mystery, no lingering threat, just the memory of how absurd the whole situation had been. Sitting back in my living room that night, still replaying everything in my head, I realized something important. Sometimes life throws ridiculous, terrifying situations at you, and the only thing you can do is survive them, and maybe laugh a little afterward. And I did laugh, not because it wasn't scary, but because the situation was so absurd I couldn't help myself. That night stuck with me, not as a moment of fear, but as a story I'd tell over and over. A story about someone who underestimated me, about a car he didn't understand, and about the strange mix of fear, adrenaline, and triumph that comes from surviving something completely unexpected. Even now, when I think back on that night, I can't help but shake my head. The memory feels like something out of a movie. Too ridiculous to be real, but I remember it all too vividly. The adrenaline, the panic, the absurdity of someone trying to steal a car they didn't even know how to drive. And yet, the lesson that stuck with me wasn't just about vigilance or safety. It was about underestimation. I kept replaying it in my mind, him climbing into my car, telling me to get out, and then realizing he had no idea what he was doing. My hands on the horn, my body tensed, refusing to leave, and that tiny, pivotal moment when I asked, "Do you even know how to drive manual?" It wasn't just a question. It was the moment the entire dynamic shifted. I realized he had assumed he could intimidate me, that I would panic or comply, and he hadn't counted on me thinking fast, staying calm, or standing my ground. There's something empowering in that realization. I wasn't just lucky. I wasn't just scared and lucky. I had the advantage because he made assumptions based on appearances, because he thought I looked like an easy target. But I wasn't easy. I wasn't small or weak in that moment. I wasn't silent or passive. I reacted. I defended myself, and in the end, that's what made the difference. It's funny now, thinking about the surreal contrast between that terrifying experience and the way it all ended. No damage, no injuries, no high-speed chase. Just a guy standing outside my car, embarrassed, frustrated, and completely defeated. The cops even laughed when I told them the story, shaking their heads at how absurd it had been. It's almost comedic when you step back and look at it like that. I sometimes imagine the story from his perspective, how he thought he could walk into my car, take it, and leave without thinking about the stick shift, the keys, or the horn blaring at 2 in the morning. That night left me with a mix of relief, disbelief, and pride. Relief that I came out unscathed. Disbelief that someone was foolish enough to attempt it. And pride in myself for trusting my instincts, thinking quickly, and refusing to be intimidated. I also learned to appreciate the small things I usually take for granted, like a car that only unlocks on one side, or a manual transmission that's more than just a novelty. It literally saved me. More than anything, it taught me a lesson I carry with me now. Never underestimate someone. And never assume that appearances tell the whole story. People are capable of far more than they seem in the moment, especially when they're scared, determined, or pushed into a corner. That night was terrifying, absurd, and completely unforgettable, but it also reminded me that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the most unexpected factors can make all the difference, so yeah. I survived, and every time I tell this story, part of me still laughs at the sheer ridiculousness of it. But I also remember how seriously I had to stand my ground, and how a little bit of awareness and a lot of adrenaline can turn the tables in your favor.